Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show. Folks, this is Tony coming to you from New Zealand at the last day for us here of 2019. By the time this goes out, it may even be the new year. So Happy New Year, folks, wherever you are. And it's good to be having, I believe, John Haller on the show as the first guest to either be the last day of the year or the first day of the next year, depending on where you are, to talk about a little bit about what we can expect for 2020. So welcome, John.
Good to be with you again.
And there's always plenty to talk about, as always, John. And I think the first thing, I noticed yesterday, of course, there was the church shooting in Texas with that guy in the church that, shot a couple of people and then was shot himself. And I was finding it really interesting that so far they have not mentioned the guy's name. So they've kept quiet who he was, which I find interesting.
The most I've been able to find out about him is that he came in, he had on a fake wig and beard, and he sat down in the church for a while. And then he stood up and he shot one of the volunteer security guards, and then shot another person. He got off two shots. I didn't hear a lot of shooting. And then there was one, I think he's a retired FBI guy who goes to church there. One of the people who died, and interestingly enough, that everybody wants to make a racial thing out of this. The first guy he shot was a guy in his 60s. I believe he was either still employed or is just retired as a nurse, but he was African American. The shooting occurred in a section around Fort Worth called White Settlement. That's the actual name of the village. It was given back in the 1800s when white pioneers settled there, and they were that's where all the white pioneers settled. And that's what the Native Americans called the area, White Settlement. They tried to change it a few years ago, but it was defeated by about 10 to 1 ratio of votes. So it was an African-American who was shot. I don't know if the shooter was white, black, Native American. They haven't really released that information, which is a little bit strange. But he fired 2 shots, and then the FBI guy who was a volunteer security guard there at the church got up and took him out with 1 shot. I only heard 3 shots fired.
Yes.
The video's up online. It's pretty easy to find.
Yeah, I saw it. It's kind of distressing in a way just to see it. But, yeah, it was obviously not real close up. But
look, this is comes on the heels of what even the governor of New York and the mayor of New York, who are both lefties, has described an act of domestic terrorism in Muncie, New York, about 30 miles north of New York City. A African-American man attacked a Hanukkah celebration at the home of a Orthodox Hasidic rabbi, injured 5 people. Interesting thing there, too, is that I think people are getting the message in these incidents, and we've gone through active shooter training at our church because of some of the topics we talk about. We just think that we're at risk. We have a paid armed security guard, either a deputy sheriff or policeman at our church every Sunday. We also have a security team. So I think that the reaction in our church would be very similar to the reaction of the people in this Church of Christ, because you see the video, you see like 5 people who immediately are pulling out their guns.
Which, of course, is far different than here in New Zealand, where, of course, nobody carries arms. It's illegal for a start to, the number of handguns in New Zealand is very small because you have to have a special license to have them and be a part of a club and all that. So no one carries them. There's nothing like that. It's just like...
Right.
But the thing is, we had that mosque shooting, of course, in Christchurch, where the Muslims were all shot up, and you've had the Jews, several cases recently, not necessarily always guns, but knives and so on, where they've been attacked. And then you've got churches being attacked, and I'm thinking, What's going on here that these, religious institutions and places of worship and so on appear to be being targeted at the moment?
Well, it's a huge problem in New York right now. And I noticed even the LA Times had a huge front page and interior pages article on the machete attack on Saturday evening on Hanukkah in New York. And there were, in fact, in Saturday's paper in the New York Times, there was a huge half-page interior page that was devoted to reporting on 9 clearly anti-Semitic attacks in the past week in the New York City area. And that was before this machete attack. So now everybody is wondering what's really going on now. I think it's a couple things. First, I think it's clearly a rise of anti-Semitism. I have seen personally, and I know that this is not necessarily popular with some people, but I do, support the state of Israel. I think its reformation is prophetic. Certainly, they're not faithful followers of the Lord or anything like that. But look, I think the regathering of Jews in the land of Israel is something that's foretold in Bible prophecy, and I really don't see how that happens without a Jewish state of Israel. That doesn't mean everything they do is correct, but I'm seeing a lot of attacks on Israel, a lot of attacks on Jewish people, and I think we're seeing a big rise in anti-Semitism. And so I think we're going to see more and more of these. I was reading an article today, I believe it was in The Atlantic. I read a lot of media that I don't agree with. The Atlantic is a center-left, a left publication, but I think it's one of the more fair publications in the way that it's still a good journalist publication in that they really look at the facts. But there was an article in there, I can't remember the title of it, and she said, even more troubling to her than the attacks that she saw in New York City over the past week was synagogues in the Netherlands are refusing to publish the time of their services and even the location. They're refusing to publish the times of the services and even the location because of what they perceive as potential attacks by people on the people gathered to worship. So this is going to be an increasing problem. I think there's also an attack on Christians.
Yeah.
And I expect to see this thing occur. Now, usually what accompanies these shootings here in the U.S. is immediately a lot of people will come out and say they're false flags, they're design, they're made up attacks. Not that they didn't happen, but that they're designed to give support to people who want to undo the Second Amendment that we have here in the United States that allows people to have firearms and possess them and even carry them. But my personal view is every time I see these attacks happen and I hear the false flag arguments as to why they're doing this, the only thing that happens is that people with common sense are more committed to keeping their guns than ever. So I don't know that they're winning the day and the argument based on common sense and reason. Now that does, arguments based on common sense and reason don't always carry the day these days, but we do have a strong Second Amendment. The Supreme Court has recently issued some opinions in favor of the Second Amendment. So I'm personally not concerned about it. There was also a lot of discussion, videos, podcasts, whatever, about what's going on in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where the Democrats now control both houses of the legislature starting January 1st, and the governor, and talking about that they want to enact legislation to get rid of guns.
That's interesting. See, in New Zealand, obviously, our gun laws are much more stringent than the US, but we have still, compared to many countries, our laws are still have been relatively liberal. But as many people know, following that mosque shooting, they outlawed semi automatics bigger than a 22, and they also the size of magazines. And what really irked me about that was actually that they snuck it under calling them military style semi-automatics and all that, but at the same time they actually banned a lot of antique guns that had fixed magazines, like rifles, old Winchesters and things that had more than 10 rounds. So you either had to surrender them in to be destroyed, or you've got to have them modified so that they hold no more than 10 rounds. So that kind of irked me. But the next phase of things that they want to do here is to bring in a gun registry, so that everybody in New Zealand has to register all their guns and where they're stored and so on. And I was, one of the biggest problems we have with that is, well, all it takes is for them to leak that registry, for somebody to leak that registry, and then all the gangs have got a shopping list of where everything is, who's got what.
Right.
And just recently, a police officer in Auckland was actually jailed for leaking some other information to a gang. So all it would take is for a rogue police officer, or for the gangs to put someone in the police or whatever and be able to do that. So that's a big problem I have with the gun registry idea. So that's just a little bit on New Zealand. Obviously,
That's almost exactly what they're proposing to enact as legislation in Virginia.
Well, you can see what the problem is then.
Sure.
That it's a shopping list for people that want to know where they can get something illegally.
Yeah, and they always say, well, we'll encrypt it and we'll protect the list so it can't be hacked. But how well does that go these days?
Well, it doesn't go that well, especially if it's an insider that happens to be the one that leaks it anyway.
Well, I think I just saw that in England, there's like a list of celebrities and royals or, people in power. And somebody hacked the database that lists their home addresses, and it's been released to the public now. So this stuff is not private. In Virginia, though, what sort of exacerbated the situation, the people who've proposed the legislation, they've said, look, we'll grandfather in certain antique and arms that are in the possession of people already. But that's usually a smokescreen. But then there was one state legislature that said, well, listen, if you won't register your gun, we're going to send the National Guard out to get your guns. And of course, everybody's jumped on that they're going to enact martial law and all this other things. And this is a test case for the country. I personally am not that concerned about it. The belief in the Second Amendment is sort of a founding principle of America. And it has tremendous support. And unless they're going to vastly increase the size of police and military forces just for the United States, I personally don't see it happening. That doesn't mean they won't try. I don't think they're going to be successful. The pushback response to what the governor of Virginia has been saying, and by the way, this is the governor of Virginia who was almost forced to resign last year because he had appeared in blackface with a guy in a Ku Klux Klan costume at a party when he was in college.
Oh, yeah.
And then he didn't resign because the lieutenant governor who would replace him also had, I don't know if he had harassed some female or something. And it was like all the top leadership of Virginia got a pass because they're left wing. And of course, we can forgive them and we accept the fact that they might have done penance and that sort of thing. But the backlash to the statements that have come out of in opposition to the Democrats wanting to take guns has been that I think 85 of the 94 counties in Virginia have voted to make themselves Second Amendment sanctuary counties, saying that we don't care if the state enacts this law, we're not going to enforce it if it appears to be unconstitutional. And so there's a bit of a constitutional crisis coming to a head in the next month in the state of Virginia. And I think you're going to see this in different places around the country. But I would think in most of the country, particularly in the states that voted for Trump, this stuff is not going to go anywhere. It's going to be mostly in the left-wing urban counties.
The thing is that they increment things, though. Like it may take a while, but they keep on getting, inroads further and further. So in New Zealand here, because we had this supposed gun buyback scheme after the Christchurch massacre and all of that, well, the number of semi-automatics and so on that people have handed in is way below what they were expecting, like 28% or 30% possibly. So that means probably an awful lot of people have hung on to weapons which are now illegal. So it's going to be interesting to see what will happen in this case here in New Zealand. Of course, the gangs and so on are never going to abide by the laws. They're not going to surrender their weapons, and they're the ones that should be being targeted instead of the law-abiding gun owners, But anyway, I don't want to be on a soapbox, but I am kind of irked a little bit by what's been going on here. So.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's something to be concerned about. I think it's something to certainly be aware of and to take action. I just don't know. Here in the United States, I just don't see them having the political and physical muscle to implement these ideas.
Will they implement them in some states, though, or some districts, do you think?
I think they'll implement them where they can. Of course, it's going to be mostly urban areas, which are left-leaning Democrat areas that would support this. It's interesting, though, that those are the ones that have the highest murder rates of any place in the country.
Without guns.
Well, and already have the most restrictions on guns. I mean, Chicago is horrible. We were up there 2-3 years ago, and they were doing some construction on the freeway. I ended up in a very bad area on the south side of Chicago. I am not usually afraid. I was to the point of shaking, afraid, holding onto the steering wheel of my car till I got out of that area, because the shootings that occur in that area on a weekly basis are really off the charts. Baltimore, which has also been pushing for more gun control, they will set the all-time record for per capita murder rate ever in the history of American crime statistics this year. The city's in terrible shape. It's interesting how that might play into Bible prophecy, because ever since man went into the first city, Babel, cities have always been a problem from a moral standpoint. And I think we're going to see this play out. Whatever happened with Babylon, and God eventually bringing judgment on that, is people move more and more into cities. I think this helps accelerate Bible prophecy, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's.
And we see some of these things demographic. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned this on a previous visit with you, but the growth of cities around the world is really, it's off the charts. And they're predicting that there are a number of cities in Africa that by 2050 and by 2100 will be 80 to over 100 million people in like 5 cities, 3 of which you've never even heard of. And that's because people are moving to the cities. I think governments try to do that. They try to get people into urban areas because they can control them better. And it gives them more support for their big government ideas. We have these ridiculous things here in Columbus. We have these bike lanes. I have yet to see anybody in a bike lane in downtown Columbus. And they're all over the place. They're special painted. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I pulled out of the parking garage, which is, until you come up the ramp, and I almost hit a guy the other day on a bike on the sidewalk. And there was a bike lane, 10 feet away. Nobody uses these things. It's this, I don't know, this mythology that, we're all going to we're all going to be Europeans. That's what they like. Copenhagen, 50% of the people ride a bike to work. Well, people aren't going to, as wind chill was 22 degrees here in Columbus today. Nobody's going to ride a bike
Yeah.
in that kind of weather.
No.
It's kind of silly, but this is the age that we live in, is the silly age.
Totally. And now you mentioned the world government sort of move and all of that. Well, it brings me to just, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the Brexit thing. I looked today in I think the express.co.uk, it said this: US ambassador confident of post-Brexit trade deal in 2020. Incredible year. US ambassador to the UK, Woody Johnson, has said 2020 is set to be an incredible year ahead of the start of post-Brexit talks between Boris Johnson and US President Donald Trump. The US ambassador has called on the two nations to embrace the opportunity and send trade into the stratosphere. Let's embrace the opportunity to take the US and UK trade into the stratosphere, he said. Now, I find that really interesting because a lot of our listeners will know I've had James Musker from England on the show from London a few times, and James has always said that amongst the elite and the Illuminists there's always been a division about whether Britain should be part of the European Union or whether they should be aligned with another group, I think an Oceania type group or whatever, I can't remember the name of it, from the Club of Rome's original documents and so on, where Britain will be aligned with the UK, with the US. So a lot of people are thinking, oh, this is a victory of the people over the globalists, but actually it could very well be that even if Britain does get out of the UK, all they're doing, out of the EU, is moving into another group, which the elites have always possibly planned to have as a large group anyway. So the globalists are still in control either way. But it's going to be interesting to see, as we look into 2020 with the Brexit exit looming, what actually happens here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that you're going from one globalist group that's focused on Europe to a globalist group that's focused on something else.
Yeah.
I do see sort of the big push for globalism happening on a number of levels. It continues. Everybody's pushing their 2030 agendas. Even Saudi Arabia has their 2030 agenda. Dubai has theirs. And, when you look behind all of these, they're all sort of the same goals. It's, they use the whole climate change thing as sort of a ruse to push in their socialist agenda.
Totally agree with that.
I mean, Greta Thunberg, the great Greta, Saint Greta, and I say that with as much sarcasm in my voice as I can muster tonight. She essentially came out last week and said this is about getting rid of capitalism. And so as we think about how this sort of economic and geopolitical beast system comes together in the end times, I do think that socialism plays a part. I think that I think that ecumenical religion plays a part as well. I shared yesterday some of the things that the Pope was saying in his speech to the Roman Curia, the Curia of Cardinals, his Christmas message, and saying, essentially, we need to rewrite Christianity. It's not too dissimilar from what the Chinese dictator Xi has said, that they've issued regulations. They have a committee in China to rewrite religious texts to support the Communist Party and their socialist communist goals.
It comes down to the same thing again, really. The people are serving the governments instead of the government serving the people.
Absolutely. So, there's always been a lot of speculation in Bible prophecy circles about how this final beast empire, geopolitics, and religion system comes together. And I think they're joined at the hip. I do think socialism is a huge part of it. It kind of struck me when Pope Francis came to America a few years ago. He gave a speech to Congress, And he cited three people in his speech to Congress. He cited Robert Merton, a mystic. He cited Martin Luther King, who had his own issues. And he cited Dorothy Day, who was I guess you could think of her as a female Bernie Sanders. She was a radical socialist. And she actually was the paramour of an uncle of a friend of mine. And she was a radical socialist. And I thought of this, though, that here's everybody sort of praising the Pope. He has a political agenda as much as he has a religious agenda. And, a lot of people speculate, well, the Pope is the false prophet. I'm not sure that that's correct, but I was thinking that even if he is, when we see the rise of the Antichrist, he's supported by the false prophet on the religious system. But then when the Antichrist gets to power, he turns and destroys the religious system. But he doesn't destroy the false prophet, because the false prophet is really a fake. And if I've ever seen a fake Christian in the broad sense of the term, it's Pope Francis.
Totally agree. Yeah.
I mean, he is a liberation theology, socialist, communist, I don't care, whatever left-wing descriptive term you want to use. And he is a total, complete fake. And, if you go to Catholic websites, there are a host of people that are totally opposed to what Francis is doing. Church Militant and other websites like that.
Yeah, I've got a list of URLs, which I've been meaning to make a video at some point on various aspects of what Pope Francis has been doing and saying. And if he's not the false prophet, and I'm not convinced he is, he's like the John the Baptist for the false prophet, one way or the other. He's definitely helping the system.
He's certainly running for the post.
Yes, he is. Yep, totally.
And it's shocking to me. They even had in this Christmas celebrations at the Vatican last week, they had one of these Amazon people with that idol that they, sort of paid respects to with the Pope and everything. Well, they had this idol again, and then they had everybody kind of cross their arms in some kind of symbolic gesture of worship to Mother Gaia.
Wow. In
response to one of these Amazon people it's just, I sit here and it's hard for me to, I've known all these things would happen, but I have trouble believing them when I see them, because they're really even beyond what I expected would happen.
Yeah, and it's happening so quickly.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's just so many things happening. So 2020, I think, is going to be an extremely interesting and important year as they move a lot of things into play more and more. And I think another aspect of that is the censorship and the internet censorship and what they're trying to do, even Russia and China and places like that, with the censorship of the internet. And of course, our own New Zealand Prime Minister jumped on after the Christchurch attack this year. They had this thing called the Christchurch Call with the French Prime Minister and whatnot, about hate speech online. So, nobody wants to see, well, no one in their right mind wants to see hate speech being promoted and so on, real hate speech. But the problem is, the more they regulate everything, the more it gives governments the ability to censor anything that they don't like, basically, which is what happens in China. They can shut down the whole internet at the blink of an eyelid and so on, and with all their surveillance and their social credit scores. And I'm thinking, man, this is just, you can just see how the Big Brother syndrome is being, welcomed with open arms by a lot of people because of all the things that are going on, the shootings and the hate speech and everything else.
Well, especially the ruling elites in Europe. And Europe is enacted at the European Union government level, has enacted a lot of regulations, and some of these are coming out of like the country legislatures, like France. People are introducing this legislation not only in France but at the EU level, and essentially, they make these restrictions on the tech companies that if you want to have access to the internet, and we've determined something is hate speech, you have to take it down from everywhere in 24 hours. And it's extraterritorial. So it will result. And so what the tech companies will do is they will go with the path of least resistance. They're not going to say, well, that's only in America, so people in Europe can't access that. They'll just take it down everywhere. And I don't know how your things are going on YouTube.
Oh, they've been unsubscribing people, which reminds me, folks, check that you're still subscribed to our YouTube channel, because I noticed they unsubscribed a bunch of people again between Christmas and now.
Yeah, and we run into the same thing. Our subscriptions have grown over time. They go up about 15 to 20 a day pretty consistently.
Well, I find that ours do, and then there's a whack down. Like they might go up like that, and then they take them back down. So they only incrementally rise very, very slowly. They add a few and subtract a few. And so we don't really make a lot of progress. Haven't done for months.
Right. And I think we're being shadow banned in a way. Some weeks the views are down, some weeks they're up. I can't figure it out. So we just put it up, and if people want to go and subscribe at Fellowship Bible Chapel, they're free to do so. But I haven't unlocked the secret on how to figure it out. And pretty much because I am pretty bold in talking about certain issues, particularly what I see as one of the big prophetic signs and issues is this whole transgender and LGBT issue. And I talk in pretty stark terms about that. And so everything I put up is almost immediately put into restricted mode immediately. So I don't know if I have my own little personal monitor that sort of does this to our channel. I have no idea. The system, as you know, is totally opaque. It's not that it's not not very transparent. It's totally opaque.
Yeah, you've got no idea.
You can never talk to a person.
No, it's the same with us. Did you notice the thing about Poland with the LGBT agenda and transgender? Oh, yes. I don't have the article in front of me, but some areas in Poland are basically tossing out the whole thing and saying we're not going to be an LGBT-friendly area with their laws and whatnot. So it's causing some stirs in Europe because parts of Poland are becoming, they're bucking that system, basically.
Well, the thing that's a problem here is that they are bringing this into the schools without letting the parents know. And I've said that if you get a kid in school now, it's almost, in my view, unless you are 100% certain or knowledgeable of what your kid is being taught, particularly in the area of sex and family, you got to get your kids out of the school. I know it's difficult. I know it's expensive, but I just don't see any other way. It's so interesting to me, Tony. They here in America, I don't know if you have it over there in New Zealand, this drag queen story out. They even have a website, and they bring in these garish men dressed up as drag queens to read stories to little kids like 5 and 6 years old. It's grooming. It's so blatant. It's way beyond anything that Jeffrey Epstein did, for crying out loud, in my view. And it's not like they bring in a local banker or executive or business owner who has struggled with gender identity, and he talks about his life. They bring in this extreme stuff. A year ago, Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, was giving a little speech at a hotel a block from my office. So I thought I'd walk over. It was Stonewall weekend in Columbus. It was the Gay Pride celebration. And so in the city of Columbus, which, roughly 2 million people in our metropolitan area, they get 500,000 people to come to the big celebration on Saturday. Friday, they have some of the precursor events. And to get to the hotel where Pence was speaking, I had to walk down Gay Street, of all names. And they were having the drag queen beauty contest right there in the open, in the middle of the street, in the middle of the day, kids and everything all around. And it's shocking. I mean, it's just shocking as to what they're doing. And what they're doing is there's been a big push in education to sort of keep parents in the dark about what their kids are being taught. So in any event, they're really not even allowing people to know what their kids are being taught. This is part of a huge agenda that has overtaken the school system, particularly here in America. I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand.
It is, from what I understand.
In fact, let me, in that regard, I mentioned that maybe one thing we could talk about briefly was the growth of this social justice movement in feeling and teaching in our schools. And it's an agenda. There was a recent study that was released. It was referenced in an article by a lady who I respect. I think she's an atheist, but she's a great writer. Her name is Heather McDonald. And there's a report about social justice education in America, particularly in colleges and universities. And there's an interesting comment here. I just wanted to read it as to the guy who wrote it. He did a lot of research on this, and he tried to find out, okay, what's happening? What's a representative sample of what's happening across America? And the person who's writing this report that you can get online, it says these steps make the report readable. He's trying to limit it to certain universities. Readable at least to those who can bear a surfeit of absurdities piled on mountains of head-shaking folly, rising from dismal plains of ignorance. And it's one of those clever turns of a sentence that I wish I was smart enough to write. But this is everywhere, and it's seeping into churches. Southern Baptists have essentially adopted critical race theory in the way they, I think, interpret scriptures. They had a resolution last year. It's sweeping over Christian colleges. And so when I read the other day that Prime Minister Xi of China and the Chinese government wanted to rewrite the Bible, essentially, to make it consistent with social justice, socialism, communism, my initial comment was, well, I don't know that they need to waste their time doing it. Just go down and get some people from the local so-called evangelical seminary, because they've probably already done some of the rewriting for you, at least in terms of the Bible. And this is eviscerating the gospel. It's permeating the university at almost every level, and it's dripping down into high school and middle school and elementary school as well. It's a huge problem, and again, I think this all plays into sort of this accelerating rise of a beast system that we see. I don't think it gets turned around at this point.
No, I don't think it will get turned around at this point either. It's just so interesting seeing the various angles of things coming together, really. And it will be interesting to see what happens in 2020 in the US and in American politics, for a start, with the whole after the impeachment thing, and you've got an election year coming.
Well, there's we've talked about this in the past, these supposed sealed indictments and all this stuff.
Oh, yeah, the nonsense. Yeah.
I think this is, I hate to say it, I think it's a psyop. And I see more and more people saying, hey, what's really going on? For 2 years now, we've had people telling us that arrest of hundreds and thousands of people were imminent, that they were going to take them down. Now, I think part of that the fact that people accepted that, they're just not well versed in how the system works. And I'm an attorney. I'm not touting myself as an expert, but I think I understand how the system works. And so in order to have an indictment, you have to have a grand jury hearing, you have to have all these things, and you have to have a crime. You have to have a discernible, definable crime. And the problem with what a lot of things that have happened and the abuses, and I think there's clear abuses in the way the whole Russian investigation, the Ukrainian thing, all of these things have major problems, and they show a system that's run by people who really don't care about the Constitution and that type of thing. But I'm not sure that a lot of what's happened is crimes. So I think people's expectations were raised by a lot of these assertions that there were. 2 years ago, I remember it was 8,000 indictments.
Yeah.
Now the last numbers I've seen are 150, 175,000, but you don't have a sealed indictment sitting in a court filing for 2 years. It never, ever happens that way. And it's just not possible logistically. There's not enough, even if every U.S. attorney was working towards the same goal, which we know that they're not. Even if every government attorney was working on this, there's just not enough people to investigate all of these things to put together complex indictments in that period of time. And so the problem is people are now getting very emotional about the issue is what's Trump doing? Is he part of the elite game, or is he real, or have we been fooled by him or not? And the answer is I really don't know. I think he's faced with a very difficult situation. Many people forget that on the way out the door, what the Obama administration did was incredibly clever. They took political appointees in all of these different agencies, and there are thousands that they get to appoint, and they converted the vast majority of them from a political employee to a government service job. When they're in that government service job, they're subject to rules and regulations, and they are almost impossible to fire. I think you have your chances, you have the chances of winning a lottery are pretty close to your chances of firing a federal government employee. So now what you have is these Obama administration ideologues, which were political appointees, in key positions throughout the federal government. And so this is the classic definition of what I would call the deep state. So we know that these people will oppose everything that Trump does. So whether Trump's part of the game or not, we can argue about that. But the fact of the matter is, whoever would be in that office that was trying to push something in terms of a conservative, constitutional, a strict construction of the Constitution agenda would be attacked. I mean, you see this with Attorney General Barr, who I think is a decent guy. He's been in and out of government over the last 30 years. He's given some fantastic speeches recently about how secularists are destroying the United States. They're undermining morality, and they're against what the Constitution says. I agree with everything he said in those speeches. And just today, I think it was today, there's an editorial in the New York Times. I guess it was yesterday. Bill Barr thinks America is going to hell, and he's on a mission to use the authority of the executive branch to stop it. And it's a hit piece on the editorial page, which they're allowed to do. But here's a guy who really does seem to be standing for traditional values in a strict interpretation of the Constitution, and he's getting lambasted in the media for doing that.
Yeah. It just, I don't want to spend much time on this because time is running out, but whether you ask what side is Trump on, well, another angle of that is, for example, neither of us are anti-Israel, right? We know there's faults there and all that. But the fact is that I'm quoting Donald Trump from a book of Donald Trump's, an older book written by Donald Trump. One day when my Kabbalah teacher, Eaton Yardeni, asked how I was doing, I told him I needed a break. I was thoroughly exhausted, overwhelmed and overworked. Eaton said, then do you know what you should do now? And so on. But Donald Trump there straight out said Eaton Yardeni was his Kabbalah teacher. Now, Eaton Yardeni is one of the heads of the Kabbalah Center. So it's not some, I mean, he's a rabbi that's, very deeply into the Kabbalah and all that. Also the mentor to people like Madonna and Adam Neumann with this corporate disaster that's just recently happened, which we won't go into. But Adam Neumann apparently helped Jared Kushner work on the peace deal and made the video and all that. Now that company's gone bankrupt and all that. But there's real ties to the Kabbalah there. And I'm thinking all that Trump is doing with the Third Temple stuff and all of that, it's playing into Bible prophecy, but maybe once again, there's just opposing factions within the elites that aren't all agreeing on exactly how they want things to work. So you have one faction, we're all heading towards this beast world government thing, but there's perhaps factions amongst them that want to take it in different directions. And so I think, personally, I think Donald Trump's he's an insider. I don't believe he's an outsider, but he may be on one faction that other factions don't necessarily agree with, put it that way. That's how I see it.
Yeah, well, I don't think, I've read and watched a lot of this impeachment stuff. I think the whole thing is a big political show. It's there's no substance to it. It's not going to go anywhere. And I think it's just done for political reasons. So I think I agree with you that I think there are big government Republicans, there are big government Democrats. I think they disagree on some fundamental approaches, but I think they all sort of want the same thing. It's just that they want to be in charge.
You don't get to be the head of anything in power without being an insider and part of the club. You just don't get there. That's why I've never believed Donald Trump is an outsider. I do believe he's put there. Some of what Trump does is good, some of it's not. But I've never been convinced that he's fighting the globalists and against the New World Order and all this nonsense that Q and all of them are pushing. And you mentioned the sealed indictments and all that. Okay, yeah. John, we're getting pretty much close to running out of time. So have you got any other thing, because I don't want to stay on that because our time's gone. So anything else you want to quickly bring up before we finish?
Yeah, there's an interesting editorial op-ed piece in the New York Times the other day by David Brooks, who is sort of a center-right guy, pretty reasonable a lot of the time, but, still sort of part of that New York Times machine. But he had a very interesting article about, why the media is broken, he said.
By the way, just before you go on, just in case people are wondering, the book I quoted from Donald Trump was called Trump, The Way to the Top, the best business advice I ever received. And that was on page 188, that quote, if anyone questions whether I'm accurate. Okay. So carry on, John.
And so the media is broken, and we have this really contentious political system now. Nobody trusts anybody. Nobody believes anything. And I think Brooks makes an interesting point. He says that facts don't matter anymore. And he quotes an article from National Affairs, which says, let me see if I can find it here real quickly, that we're not politically at odds, we're emotionally at odds. Everything is emotional now. Nobody, he cites an article by Jonathan Rauch in National Affairs. Ideological polarization is not on the rise. Emotional polarization is on the rise. We don't necessarily disagree more. We perceive our opponents to be more menacing. We see more fearfully. I think this is a very astute observation of where we are in the world today. I have shared this many times. I am a trial lawyer. Trial lawyers present facts to courts and to juries for a decision based on the facts. That is how I was trained. That is one of the reasons I went into law, because I try to be a fact guy. It was about 25 years ago that I noticed a change. You used to go to trial lawyer training seminars, and you were trained in how to effectively present facts to the trier of fact, a jury or a judge. About 25 years ago, I noticed a change, and it became, you have to present things to appeal to people's emotions, because that is how you will win your case, not based on the facts, but on how effective you are at appealing to people's emotions. The result of a lot of that now is very few cases go to trial other than criminal cases. They're usually settled out of court. It's ruined, in my view, the trial system in America, which was pretty good at resolving disputes. Mistakes were made, but now it's all based on emotion, and businesses know this, and so they will, a lot of cases will be settled before trial. I travel around the state, mainly Ohio and Indiana. I'm in and out of courthouses all the time. I can tell you it is extremely, 20 years ago, when I would be in and out of courthouses, there would be judges holding jury trials in civil cases. It has been years since I've been in a courthouse in Ohio or Indiana, and I've seen juries hearing civil cases. This is a big deal to me, because the culture has become emotion-based, not ideologically based on facts. This undermines Christianity. It undermines the gospel. It undermines what churches should be about. And I think this is and we're going to see this trend continue. I wish it wasn't true, but this is going to continue and accelerate. And you're going to see more and more of this in 2020. This is going to be a watershed year in looking at this ideological, emotional polarization.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for that. Now, I just want to close up by saying to people, well, first off, personally, for the way I see it, for 2020 is to keep from becoming swayed by the non-facts, the fiction, and get the facts. Read the Bible so you actually get God's perspective on things. Read it for yourself. Don't listen to necessarily other people as much as reading it for yourself. And also research anything that you hear and see in the media. Don't take it as gospel truth, especially if it's coming from even the alternative media, but especially not the mainstream media. Do your own research, and you'll find that in many cases, because this is what I do, you find conflicting things and you have to dig deeply to find the actual facts in articles that are generally often not articles about facts. They are opinions, and then you find the facts somewhere in the article. So be very careful, folks, on what you actually take to be the gospel truth in any area, and that includes Christianity and, like with the watering down of Christianity and so on. Read the Bible for yourself.
Be a good Berean.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, John, I want to say thank you so much for launching us to 2020, and no doubt we will be having plenty more of these discussions during the year. So thank you again.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless you too. Folks, don't forget to visit John Haller's YouTube channel at Fellowship Bible Chapel, and also visit aminutetomidnight.com and our YouTube channel. Make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. Check that you haven't been unsubscribed. Also our iTunes channel, and follow and bookmark our website aminutetomidnight.com. We do really appreciate donations, and A Minute to Midnight is run 100% by donations. You can help us by donating at the website as well. It's hugely appreciated by the few people that do support us, but honestly couldn't do it without your help. So thank you to the supporters that help us out. and if you want to join them, you can. The music I've written, played and recorded, that's used in the show as well. And that's about it. We will hopefully be catching you with a bunch more shows in the new year. Happy New Year to you all, folks, and we will, God willing, be back again in a few days' time.